you so much for coming. I'm Josephine, one of the directors of Art Gallery. Actually, all the directors are here tonight. We've got Ian and Rydia here as well. And this is Karen McLean, the artist, who is going to be talking tonight and whose work we've got here. There's an extra piece in the show tonight that we'll touch on at some point, just in case you've been before and wondered what that's doing there, or whether you were unsure about the curation and position of it. Just quickly about Art Gallery, for those of you who don't know us. Art Gallery, we've been around for 5 years now here in this building in the Oprint Works. We're a community interest company, so we have the social mission of facilitating dialogue in the community, and we use art as a tool to achieve that. So for us it's really important to not just put really great art on the walls, but also to help more people access art and get more people talking to one another. So this is one of the ways we do that, obviously a quite traditional way, but we also do things like workshops and events and all sorts of stuff, but I won't bore you with everything we do. You can look on our website or on our social media. So Karen, let's get started. I thought maybe it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit about your biography, your background, where you're from, and then sort of, because that has informed the work, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so I was born in Trinidad and Tobago in 1959. So at that time we were still a British colony. Shortly after we got independence in 1962. So I grew up there, and in the 60s, as you know, they had all the civil rights movements and so on happening in the United States, and everything that was happening there was actually feeding into the Caribbean as well. So in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, we had a revolution called Black Power Revolution. And at that time in Trinidad, you know, for the first time after independence, black people were really asserting their identity. This was all tied up with the sugarcane unions, and it was quite a scary time. You know, I would be going to school in the mornings, and we'd run into a big, massive demonstration on the streets. So, you know, and my dad, I forgot to tell you about that actually. My dad is Caucasian, he's white with English and Scottish heritage. And my mom is Chinese. Her dad is from Hong Kong, and her mom is Trinidadian, of Chinese, African, and Spanish origin. So I'm very multicultural. So, but I would be driving to school with my dad. My dad is a white Caucasian man, as I said before. So it was a pretty scary time as a little girl. You know, we'd have to lock all the windows up, and you know, sometimes they would shake the car and you're just sitting there and you're not sure if they're going to break the windscreen. So those are my memories of the Black Power Revolution. But it was a great time for black people in the Caribbean, because that was happening all through the Caribbean. For the first time, black people could actually assert their identity, as I said before. So that died down, and with independence in '62, for the first time as well, we had a black prime minister, Dr. Eric Williams, who had been to university here. I think he was at Oxford. You know, he was a really intelligent man. So that was Caribbean, really. The entire country, of course, was built along colour lines. So I was this mixed race kid, you know, and at that time, after independence, a lot of barriers had to come down. And barriers that were critical, of course, were all to do with race. So, for instance, I would never be able to get into the country club, you know what I mean? And that had to do with race and colour and, you know, my father, his job, etc., you know, as well as class, you know. So those were the barriers. I mean, we still had an English commissioner of police for a long time, you know, and those spaces had to be filled eventually by indigenous people, you know. So I don't know if anybody, I brought this along actually because, you know, everything was based on pigmentation. So you all can have a look at this. I'm not quite sure where I fit into this, but these were the categories assigned to people in the days of colonialism, depending on how much pigment you actually had in you. So that's it really about my my background. I do have to say though that the ideologies took a lot longer than the physical barriers to come down. Mm-hmm. And still, in many ways, they're still there.
Mm-hmm. And you were telling me about your memories of seeing, so this colour blue is sort of part of your memories as well. So you were seeing bottles on the fields, shaking off the bad spirits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from a child, this blue has been part of my history and my memories. The vegetable plots all on the highways as you drive, and people would use. In those days, we had milk of magnesia that came in blue bottles, and so when they planted their fields, they would put a stick in the ground and place the upside down milk of magnesia bottle on top. So that would be, all over the field, and that was really to ward off any sort of bad looks or evil vibes that we might be trying to put on their crops. Washing. I had to use Ricketts blue, which is what I used on the devil actually. It's a little blue cube. It's a hard powder which I grated, and you had to put it in a piece of muslin and dip it into the white cloves. And it obviously came from here because I can still get it from here. Ricketts blue. Blue has been very much a part, and then of course we have the blue soap. Very much a part of my history and memory. It's quite critical actually.
Mm. And so it's obviously the name of this show is Blue Power. So it's obviously been sort of a very big influence on this show or this project.
Yes.
The blue soap.
Yeah.
And I know that I think it's a very interesting material to use as an artist, because obviously you've got it inside the crosses, and we've also got it in the curtain that everybody went through. So I think everybody's been cleansed of their bad spirits as they walk through the bead curtain. Yep. So there's an element of superstition there.
Yes.
That you're then mixing with religion, with the cross, with the graveyard. Yes. So there's a lot of elements in your sort of visual language.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the crosses are made from plasterers' lats, which are really old historic construction material used here, not in the Caribbean, because they use them here for the old houses, 300-year-old Shakespeare's house, Wattle on Dome houses, and I wanted to reference that. Construction, that old construction material, and the blue soaps. The blue soap actually made in the Caribbean, but they brought here. But they probably came from here originally because they used in the old days they would use them. They're carbolic, so they'd use them for disinfecting. And I don't know how it sort of evolved, but people in the Caribbean, we use it to. As a child, I would remember seeing people in the rivers, or scrubbing the whites of their collars with soap, and then, to get them white. But now it's used for a plethora of, different reasons, for every ill that you can imagine, especially on the island of Trinidad. If you are just going through any sort of bad time, you just wash with this blue soap, and it's supposed to, cleanse you of any problem that you're having. And the houses that I build, the small ones, people actually put them like over the doors, so that when you walk in, you're cleansed again of that bad that you may bring in. So it's just used for about everything. And we had a video actually. We can't show the video.
No, but I did post it in the Facebook event for this.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good, yes.
Because so they sing bathe them, don't they?
Yeah. So, that's a 2018 Carnival video showing you how they actually bathe. They put a pool in the middle of the road, really, and they were bathing people for just about everything that was going on. Yeah.
Yeah, someone had been thieving. And
yes, the child was stealing, you remember?
Yes.
Yeah. So they put the child in the pool and bathed him with blue soup. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so it holds a lot of superstitious, power, really. Cleansing power.
Yes. And so this idea of superstition then also connects to colonialism and post-colonialism in the sense that people sort of they had their own beliefs. The missionaries brought over Christianity, and it also became a sort of mixture of beliefs, didn't it?
Yeah. So I got really interested after my last project. I got really interested in the resistance, really, of the slaves and the power of resistance. So on the night of the private view, we had some choir singers here, and one of the things that was really important to me was how the slaves used their singing as a form of resistance, and it was something that they really could not stop them from doing, but it was so powerful. And how that survived, how resistance survives, because resistance is so powerful. And it survived, and it has given us all these wonderful genres of music that we have today. We have jazz, we have blues, we have hip hop. In the Caribbean, we have calypso. Now we have soca. So it's given us so many wonderful genres of music. So I got interested in that, and then I also got interested in the other forms of resistance, and of course that led me to their oral history, because we have fabulous, stories in the Caribbean, Anansi stories, and their religion, So during colonialism, or should I say during slavery, to support the institution of slavery, they actually could not be baptized because they were not humans, They were shackled. They were attached to the plantation and could be sold just like the tractor or the house or whatever. So after civilization, after emancipation, that is when they were really allowed to become baptized and to be Christianized. And as I was explaining to you before, the missionaries left in their droves to actually go to the Caribbean. In Birmingham, I'm quite on active ground here because the Birmingham Baptist Missionary Society, they sent, missionaries, droves of missionaries to civilize the subjects. So that was, and you found that, there was a lot of other things attached to that. But when they went, they eventually Christianized them, but didn't bargain for them holding on to their own religious beliefs. So as they grew through the process of freedom, and they could become part of the congregation, and they grew stronger, and they themselves started teaching, in churches. What the missionaries didn't bargain for was that they would have this, culture still here, all their religious beliefs. Well, not all, but a lot of it. So they started blending the two, and you got this syncretic, religious practice. But now we have many syncretic religious practices. We have, and it goes, like in South America, you have Santeria, you have Espiritismo, and in Trinidad we have Orisha, we have Shango Baptist, you find Voodoo in Haiti, Pocomania in Jamaica. So all the islands have their own syncretic practices, and I think, so it was important to sort of blend that with, for the project, to get it to work, to sort of highlight that aspect of it.
Great. I was also really interested in something you said to me about a connection that you're making. So this this term post-colonialism comes up a lot in your work.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I was very familiar with.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a lot about sort of, what are you saying about, obviously post always means after, but that connection that you're drawing between, I guess, death through the graveyard, that goes all the way back to colonialism. And I think you were saying that that connection is the poverty that sort of remained.
Absolutely.
So I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, when people think of post-colonialism, I think, oh, well, that's, centuries ago. But I mean, it's my lifetime. I was born into it, you know what I mean? So it kind of preoccupied my mind, I was constantly sort of unpicking it. So yeah. That's one of the biggest legacies, really. The poverty that was left behind. You have to remember that in 1834, when slavery was emancipated, the British government paid the plantation owners £20 million. I can't imagine what that is in this money today. But they never gave the slaves 1 penny. So they basically just kind of said, right, you're out there on your own now. They just freed these landless peasants, with no sort of compensation for bringing them halfway across the world and dehumanizing them and putting them in this environment for such a long time. That's the other thing, slavery lasted in the Caribbean for 200 years. So it's a hell of a long time. So that legacy of poverty, along with all the other social problems, has really textured the Caribbean in many ways, and continues to, texture the Caribbean. And now, due to that legacy, a lot of other distorted cultures are forming, and mostly because we sit very prettily in the blue ocean between South America and North America. So, the drug trade is the easiest way to go. And when you look at the United Nations murder map, their homicide map, some of the Caribbean islands are now some of the most dangerous places to live. So it's, it really is a problem.
Yeah. And I guess something very real when you go back now.
Yes, yeah. As I was explaining to you today, it always seems worse when you're so far away from it, because you're getting the news via the internet or via a live chat with family members or whatever. So yeah, it does seem, a lot more dangerous when you're miles and miles away. I mean, when you really actually get there, it's not as bad. But you have to go into a protected mode. You have to have your wits about you. No day is ever ordinary, and and operate in a different way. You can't jump in your car and not lock your door or roll the windows up. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think, so you've mentioned the carnival already, and you've also mentioned Haiti, and I think that's quite a nice segue to the devil. So this was a piece that was supposed to be in the show, and then for various reasons it didn't end up in the show, but we thought we'd bring it in tonight.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Blue Devil?
Yeah. So the Blue Devil is a carnival caricature where he comes out. We have what you call a juve. Juve is like starts at like about 3 o'clock in the morning. So the Blue Devils come out at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they cover themselves with blue, and they actually use the Ricketts blue, the same Ricketts blue that I put in the wash. So they probably grate it like I do, and they add it to some sort of cream or something. So they are completely covered in blue. So the slaves were, Carnival has evolved from slavery, and the slaves were known as not having any morals or good behavior. So he actually comes out at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he covers himself in this blue. So it deals with identity. So nobody knows who it is under all this blue. And he comes out and he mocks that whole thing of not having any morals or any behavior. So it's sort of a little sort of play on the whole thing. So he behaves bad. The blue devils behave really bad. They are scary. I really used to be scared of them when I was a child. But again, it's it works in another way because he's mimicking what the colonizer is saying about him, that he has no morals or behavior. And it's the whole theory of mimicry is sort of taking that power back. He mimics what the colonizer is saying to him, so he uses that power in the night. And again, because the blue soap, I really tried to work a lot with materials in this project because I wanted to exploit their domestic as well as their political agency. So the blue soap in Caribbean is also used for whitening skins, especially in Jamaica, not so much in Trinidad. Trinidad we use it for a lot of ills, any ill, but in Jamaica there was a dancehall artist called Vibes Cartel who made a song called Cake Soup. So the cake soap, he was kind of saying, use cake soap and you'll get whiter. And that sort of put the whole bleaching skin thing in a sort of a cool way that really attracted, popular culture. So the materials on this are bleach wax. I use Ricketts blue and that's about it really. So he is very white, and the rest of his, his costume and so on is blue. So I really wanted to sort of reference that. But he's also quite mean and quite powerful, and that was another aspect of it that I wanted to come out, that power.
Mm. We had a really beautiful show here, 2015, I think, Leah Gordon, of the Haitian Carnival. Mm-hmm. So there is a really famous picture that she took that has been used a lot, I think, in rave culture actually. But it's exactly that, someone looking exactly like this with the two big horns and the, I'm not sure what this bit is.
No, it's a horn too.
Oh, another horn.
Yeah.
So one of her pictures that she took has then been sort of used in popular culture, but it was quite a spooky show.
Yeah, that was very good. I remember it.
When you're alone in cold factory spaces, it was a bit creepy at times, wasn't it? So the only piece we haven't talked about is the prayer stool. So we've got a prayer stool there that you've modified to have a plant pot in the bottom. Somehow magically these flowers have been growing without light or water
or heat
or anything. Any fuel.
They're loving it.
I'm
bearing. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So the prayer stool for me sort of reference, the single mother, the one prayer stool, because. The thing that really strikes me, which we really didn't talk a lot about either, is when I go back. There's so much prayer going on. Trinidad is very, I don't know, should I say holy place? And I think it strikes me even more when I go back from here to there. Everybody is praying. There's constant prayer everywhere. That's what the exhibition is really about. There's this futility in the prayer. As much as everyone prays, the homicide rates are saying something completely different. And we're really losing a generation of young men through the process. So I was really sort of questioning. How much the prayer is really working in this environment. And the prayer stool sort of reference for me that single mom praying, for her son. And usually when you pray to an icon. You would be praying to like the Virgin Mary, or there'd be Jesus, or a cross, or something. But I decided to put it in that void to question again, you know, the efficiency or the efficacy of prayer. So I muted the prayer stool, and but I put plants, which are a form of hope that something is growing. And I'm sort of suggesting, well, maybe there's hope, but maybe it's not in the prayer. Maybe there's hope elsewhere.
And I think that element of hope is within this installation as well.
Yeah.
I think the boats have that element of sort of playfulness and, you know, sort of childishness, and something you learn very early on in life. And but then again, there is also that sort of reference to, well, it's Windrush anniversary, and
it sort of references the role that the ship played, you know, in the history of the Caribbean. But I think that the fragility of it really references, you know, how people are willing to, when people's lives become so desperate, they're willing to take any form of risk to get to a safe place to call home, you know, and I think that that's what is great about it, that it just kind of brings it right into contemporary times, you know, and references everything that's sort of going on now.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you said earlier that post-colonialism is something that people think of as sort of been and gone. But I think what we've talked about tonight is that really what's happening right now, and what's, you know, very on the news every day, with people taking these journeys, you know, leads all the way back to colonialism, and
Absolutely.
It's still very current.
Yeah. Again, if you look at the, you know, I've been looking at the United Nations murder map, or homicide map as they call it now, for a couple of years. You know, all during the time I was doing my research, and the two continents really that are most affected have the highest homicide rates are Africa and South America. I mean, that's kind of an answer there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In terms of post-colonialism.
I wonder if this is a good time to open up for some questions. If
sure.
there's if anybody has any questions or comments.
We had a death in the family. And so we had, and it was in Florida, so we had to go back and forth during the process of the exhibition, so we just couldn't get him made. And I've just been working on him, and today he kind of got to the stage where he was okay to bring out, but not finished. And we just decided that we'll include him so that, you know, we can have a conversation about it.
The installation.
I wanted to put him opposite, because the devil is always in opposition to the cross, you know. So we were thinking of hanging him there, but we didn't. Sorry. Huh? Sorry. Yeah, I know. So, but anyway, he got an outing today.
Are the actual number of boats referencing anything?
No, I think there are about 5,000 of them there. So I wanted them to probably be more like a sea of boats, and also to reference again, you know, the magnitude of the problem that is happening today as well. Yeah.
Karen, thanks for sharing your experience and the work. Is really fascinating. A couple of things really. First on, because I'm talking about the idea of hope, and I was thinking about where does that lie? Because one of the things that I see, especially in Trinidad and across the Caribbean, there is contemporary art has really kind of moved at a pace. And in Trinidad, you know, Christopher Lee lives there now, and you know, those kind of things. And with Carnival and the importance of art through Carnival. So could you kind of expand on that? How that, you know, somebody like yourself, how that has kind of instilled, you know, that not necessarily hope, but that kind of creativity and that, you know, that long-sightedness and desire to kind of move on, and how Carnival has kind of impacted on yourselves and other artists in that regard. I don't know if there's a question in there, but yeah. It's there somewhere.
I mean, in terms of hope.
In terms of how Carnival how Carnival contributed to your creativity, but the wider kind of creativity across the island, because I think, when leading up to Carnival, all the panmen are kind of practicing, all the costume, all the costume designers, so it's massive industry. So it contributes to a lot of people getting work. And from that creativity, it leads on to other things, and so you can see that really, coming out in the Carnival. So how has that really kind of impacted on the creativity then across the island, would you say?
Carnival has impacted massively, and Carnival is, as you know, Carnival is born out of, slavery.
Yeah.
It was a time when these slaves actually had a few days to actually have a good time, and they used that a lot, as I was saying before, to take that power back from the colonizer, because they would mimic them, in a lot of ways, so during that time. And it has evolved. I mean, as I was saying before, we have this fabulous music. We have calypso, we have soca now. I mean, Sparrow had to be one of the greatest calypsonians ever. So the creativity is endless, and people live for it. Even though things might be this bad in terms of the homicide rates, when it's carnival, and to think again that, after emancipation, there were times, a lot of laws were then put into place, legislation, to prevent the slaves from their culture and identity growing too strongly. So in a lot of the islands, they had drumming laws. They couldn't drum, they couldn't sing late at night, so, and for instance, in Barbados, when I did the research for my last project, a lot of those laws were actually only lifted, in the 20th century, like 1980, 1970s again, that's pretty recent. And the evolution of the creativity from those days to now, is amazing. As you know, there's a lot of creativity.
I think Carnival also has another element. I'm just thinking of the German Carnival just because I'm a bit more familiar with it. Not that I know much about it, but I do think if you're in your 20s and you're growing up in a country, you tend to not be very interested in sort of ancient practices. But Carnival is something that I think brings people together, and
it does.
It's obviously got that. Also in Leah's pictures, there were so many really young men, especially men, who were, really sort of making a fool of themselves, really going out there with their costumes. Not something you would ever see them like. Normally they're probably very cool and very conscious of how they look.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting thing, that's something that continues existing and people are willing to take part in this sort of really ancient practice.
Yeah, because when I was growing up, Carnival was a time where all the social barriers came down. We would just go out to play Juve on a Monday morning and arrive in Port of Spain, and every creed and class are there, and that's what our national anthem says, and that's how we lived. Unfortunately now, it has, barriers have gone back up again to prevent such wonderful things from happening.
You talked about superstition and where that came from in your main talk, and in your answer to your last questions, you talked about the fact that some of the original African slave practices were outlawed. I'm from Jamaica, and some of those practices are still outlawed. So you talked about Picomania. But Obeah in Jamaica is still against the law.
Obeah.
Yeah, it's still on the statute as against the law. It is interesting that one of the greatest practitioners of Obeah is one of the national heroes of Jamaica, Queen Anne of the Maroons. And one of the reasons it was outlawed was because she used it so effectively that the Maroons were granted their freedom 100 years before emancipation. It is, it's interesting that you were kind of intimating that it isn't effective because despite all of the blue soaps and whatever, it still doesn't work in the favour. It maybe is more effective than some people think. Yes.
Well, that's why I'm questioning it.
It's more effective than some people. And it isn't, some of the practices is not just about warding off evil, but it's about, physical medicines, sort of plant medicines, holistic practice. I think it was the original holistic practice, mind, body, spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the question I was going to ask. The question I was going to ask was about what you said about prayer. Despite all the prayer, it doesn't seem to be working. And I was going to ask, could it possibly be worse without the prayers?
I'm not sure. That's something, you never can tell. But, yeah. So
Leeds University is doing some research into prayer at the moment. And they're asking, and a few years ago, they did more research into prayers. There was a big headline in one of the newspapers, prayer works. So maybe, if there were not these constant prayers in Trinidad, things could be worse.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't answer that.
Absolutely, we'll be able to at some point.
It's a question, and then that whole thing, because I was brought up a really strict Catholic myself. So, yeah, and it, I think for me, I'm working through this as well. What is the value?
Just like, where do you, we were talking earlier about post-colonialism and things. Where do you think Commonwealth sits in all of this?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, we're all still Commonwealth countries, aren't we? So, yeah.
Do you have a view on it or?
I'm not really sure if there's any value to being a Commonwealth. I haven't actually explored it, to find out. There's always a, this thing about being Commonwealth, but to me, I don't actually see any value.
Why do you think the administrations from particular islands or countries see a value in that? In the sort of continued membership. It's a strange one, isn't it, really?
It is a very strange one. And it just kind of makes me think that do they still want the attachment to the mother country, and probably, whatever prestige it brings with it, or whatever the affiliation, it is, yeah.
Where to get prestige.
Yeah.
It's another superstition.
What do you want to say, Ian?
No, because one of the things I think, across the Caribbean, Jamaica and Trinidad, what I've experienced is that because of what the British brought with colonial systems was this bureaucracy and the standard of bureaucracy within the civil service, and you see that railways, and through the Privy Council that's still in existence. So there seems to be at that level the willingness to maintain those standards because it seems to have that kind of, that's a particular kind of standard at that level.
Because all our laws and legal system and everything is still based on the system.
So there is
changing that might be problematic.
But you still got to, So there is that, and then I think also, there are potential financial, still some, financial rewards both ways, not just, not just coming from Britain to the Caribbean, but back and forth. So trade in that regard. So that is still an important element to it. So it is a strange one. But I think also then because of the closeness to the United States, that's where a lot of people seem to, rather than coming to the UK, the States was the pull because the much wider opportunities. So there's more of a leaning towards that side because of the wider opportunities at that time, the perceived opportunities that exist. But I mean, one of the good things that they do have is the University of West Indies, that system right across the Caribbean, which is really strong. That standard of education, academic institution, is really, really strong, and a lot of people, look to that as a good kind of torchbearer across the Caribbean, I'd say.
Yeah.
So we've had a lady waiting for a while.
It's nothing great, but I love Carnival, just harking back to that. I go to every single one that I can find. I've got to do Mardi Gras yet. But Carnival, I mean, maybe you're aware that the slaves, because obviously their position was so bad and they suffered so much, particularly through their body and the fact that they were distinguished by the colour of their skin. So what they would do is they would celebrate in secret.
Yeah.
And the word carnival actually means farewell to the flesh. So they would, at that moment in time, forget about their physical suffering and the fact that they were distinguished by the colour of their skin, and they would use that moment to get rid of their physical flesh and be happy, I suppose, for that moment. Yeah. Yes, I just wanted to share that if anybody wasn't aware.
It was just something that the gentleman had said about the Commonwealth and your response. And you talked about slavery and post-colonialism. And I think some people, my view is that some people tend to lump the two together. And I don't think they are necessarily the same, because there are lots of countries who have been colonised, which have not been enslaved. And the whole of the Caribbean, or the whole of the Black Caribbean, were enslaved. And so there's a very different legacy from there, as would be, say, from the other, what you would call Commonwealth countries that were colonised, but were not enslaved.
See, that's an interesting debate. And I've just come in here. I was talking to my mother on the phone, and my mother's from Hong Kong. So my dad was stationed out there, came back, and I'm local, so you come to, you're involved in these sorts of things. Birmingham, so there's obviously always a strong influence on the Caribbean or Africa or whatever. And it is interesting, where you try. I'll come along, listen to this or read something, and then you look at it, and then you wonder whether you're looking at it through the same lens, if that makes sense. If you compare it to, say, Hong Kong, and I don't know if it is. Not for better or for worse. It's but it's complex, and I think, as you said, I don't know. It's a difficult one. Because I'll talk to my mother, and sometimes you think, "Oh, Mum, can't you be more interested in your native culture? Can you stop saying it's better? Stop saying that. But it's difficult."
Yeah, because if you think of the South Asian communities in Trinidad, that was as a result of colonialism, and then they ended up, and then they came to, as the Indentured Labor came to Trinidad and the other Caribbean islands. So that's that, so they weren't enslaved, but through colonialism, and kind of created another level of layer in those.
It's not quite the same sort of direct violence, or is there? Or psychologically, when you're just listening or talking to first-hand accounts, there's a violence when you start to talk about enslavement. I mean, I was watching a program last night, and it was about this is way back to the 500s. Talking about how pirates would come, land on English shores, and take English. Yeah, exactly. And even though this is 1500 years ago, there's a violence just listening to the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, the Caribbean is really fossilized with violence. I mean, you have to remember that the whole experience of slavery in Canada was really, really harsh. And I think that Trinidad is a really interesting place, and I always draw Trinidad as an example, because the slaves were actually, they were ripped from their villages, they weren't brought in families, units, they were stripped of their clothing from the time they got on the boats. They got on the boats, they were then treated so badly, even if they died, they were just thrown over the side of the boat. They weren't fed, they were raped by the time they got to the Caribbean, and then they were sold into this horrible system, for such a long time. Family life was never encouraged on the plantation, and of course they were then dehumanized, so they were deemed as chattel. So then you had that system falling apart, and then they needed labor for the cane feasters. So that's when the indentured laborers came. But they came with a contract for 5 to 7 years. They came, some of them as family units. They tried indentured laborers from China, Hong Kong. Like my grandfather came as an indentured laborer, right? Portugal, Scotland, Ireland, It was only the Indians that really worked. So they went into the poorest places in India. They offered them a contract. They came on this contract. They could bring their family. They brought their religion. They brought their culture. They brought everything, right? And they were promised to be repatriated back. So in the Caribbean, they had this indentured labor system, mostly in Guyana and Trinidad. So we have almost 50-50 Asians and African Caribbean. Guyana has a huge percentage of Asians, Indians, mostly from India.
Is that because they didn't keep their promise to send them back, or did they not want to go?
But they didn't keep their promise because it got too expensive. They repatriated them. But what happened, I don't know about Guyana, but I know in Trinidad they gave them 5 acres of crown land. So when you look at the African Caribbean population in Trinidad, who were thrown out of the plantations with not a penny, and you look at the Asians, the Indians that came as indentured laborers and got 5 acres of land, you find two very different,
And that's a post-colonial legacy. I come from South Africa, so there are parallels with the Indians who were brought over there to do the sugar plantations and the tea that they learned in India. And this gradations of I looked down on you because, and I looked down on you because, and the relationship between the black Africans and the Asians is difficult in the same way. There's a legacy of that, isn't it?
Yes.
Of the sort of ones who are more favourably smiled on by the colonial master youth, and everybody's trying to stay a member of the Commonwealth. At least they haven't thrown. This is a change. I think one thing that's interesting, I find it when I go to South India and India, I think, well, surely they must say terrible things only about the British, but they don't, because it seems that people have recognised what you were saying about the things that they have given that has brought some structure. They didn't throw the baby out of the bath.
I'm not saying that is a good thing. I'm saying that these systems have been maintained because there is it's just a system, and there's the difficulty of deconstructing those kind of systems and what would replace it, and those that have been in those positions have continued to benefit from those because they've stayed in those positions forever. So it's just generation after generation that have benefited from those systems, and it's the same as when you go with any kind of bureaucratic system that you have in there, somebody's going to benefit. I'm not actually saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying
I
that's
just thought it was very interesting, actually, and then hearing you're bringing it up there, that it seems to have stayed because it's the same, isn't it, in the New Republic of South Africa for all the ferment that's going on. This is what you were saying about the law, the courts, or the whatever. Somebody said something, and the education and the value that's put on this sort of formal way of, which we've lost here. But that's a whole different issue from yours. But it is quite fascinating that it has stayed in all these. In these ones, and this tied up thing with this queen palaver. Interesting.
Maybe we can take one more. I'm just wary of the temperatures in here.
This is a really thought-provoking show in terms of like migration and death and hope and stuff, and fascinating talk. But in terms of like in my head, in terms of a curatorial approach, it seems to go beyond gender, so this isn't necessarily masculine or feminine. So I guess in the kind of year we're celebrating women in power, in this country getting the vote and this, that, the other, we celebrated the National Trust this year. How is the relationship with women in Trinidad in relation to what's happening with the homicide and the drug problem that you're talking about? What role are women playing? Are they what role are women playing in Trinidad at the moment, or how they're dealing with it?
Oh, well, I'm not sure, to be quite honest, but last year things really got quite out of hand, and I know that from my Facebook feed, there were quite a few women who decided they'd sort of had enough, and it was time to start activating, or getting active, in trying to do something about the crime. So, but I'm not sure across the board how much women are really getting involved. So that's really a good question for me to look into, carry on some research.
Like the crosses kind of remind me of children. In a sense, children are dying, but it's the fact that we're standing like giants looking at this work, and I think there's something about life snatched early. Discussions internally in the home and domestic is quite interesting. What's happening for in terms of research, just to have conversations. I'm not sure when you'll be returning back to Trinidad, but it'd be interesting to find out more.
That's a really good question, actually. I know there are lots of, and I know that the domestic violence has really impacted a lot on women, because you find that in the in the drug wars, the women get quite involved. You know what I mean? Sometimes, a lot of times, the gun is actually turned on the partner and the children. And there was some research done in Jamaica. The National Gallery in Jamaica had a series of exhibitions on it. And there was one gentleman in particular who was doing some research into the homicide rates, and his particular interest is why was the gun being turned on the wife or the partner. He had come back from Canada and he was really struck with how many women were being murdered. So I do have some of his research, but it definitely is a lead for me. Yeah, something that I can look at.
Domestic violence being not just one of physical violence, one of emotional, financial and cultural violence that can exist in many formats as well. So.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you, Karen. Thank you all for coming. And I don't want to wrap it up on a really boring note, but if you would be so kind to fill out a monitoring form on your way out, because as you know, we're funded, and that is the currency of funding at the moment. And if you want to be kept up to date with other events that we do, there's some little slips for your email addresses and etc. And thank you all for your really interesting questions. It was a great little chat there. Thank you.